All right, welcome. Thank you all for coming. So nice to see you guys. My name's Kyle.
Brianna Grignon.
Nick Kovacevich.
Rebecca Maestas Sincere.
What is that? What?
It's Rebecca Maestas Sincere. That is a real last name,
Wow.
Sincere. Well, it's my husband's last name, so.
Okay, understood. Mine's Miklinevich, so it's not much easier. We're going to be speaking today about building the future of cannabis. Got a few questions for these panelists here. We're just going to kind of go open forum and see where it takes us. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All
Let's
right.
go.
First things first, why don't we just go down the line, start with you, Rebecca, and just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background in cannabis, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the legal cannabis space now for almost 2 decades. That's pretty crazy to say. So about 18 years. I'm from Denver, Colorado. So native of Colorado, started technically selling weed when I was about 15, although that doesn't count towards those 18 years. So entered the space just a little bit before the rules started to be really stood up in Colorado and fully promulgated in 2009. So I started about 2007, 2008. That's when we started to see dispensaries come online. I had a group of buddies that learned how to grow in high school, and they were actively growing in a warehouse starting in the year 2000 when the law became official there under the guise of caregivership. So they'd pull down these harvests and they would throw all their trim in the trash. So I went to them and I basically said, hey, next time you pull down a harvest, can I get your trash? And they said, sure. So that's how I started my very first infused product company. It was called Cannabis, and it was a line of tinctures. It was just glycerin-based, like low and slow, doing it in our townhouse with, dryer sheets against the fan so the neighbors couldn't smell what was going on, that sort of deal.
They could still smell it, by the way, just so you know.
And then fast forward, I was at Dixie Brands for a long time, helped them build Dixie Botanicals. There for about 7 years, helped them really march through their IPO in 2018. Then I went on to Live Well Enlightened Health. They were the largest cannabis retailer at the time. I built 10 brands for them before they were acquired by PharmaCann. Then I went to The Clear, helped them expand to about 12 states, including Massachusetts, and now I'm here at Bud & Mary's.
Amazing. Thank you. Nick?
Well, it's not often I get one-upped, but Rebecca's got some years on me. I only got in the legal cannabis industry in 2010, so close. I'm close. But I will say that I was right at the early beginnings of vape. So that obviously came around later, kind of 2014, 2015. And then at the very beginning with CCELL, I was part of Kush Bottles. I was one of the founders. Kush Bottles became Kushco Holdings, later sold to Green Lane. But right then in 2017 is when we partnered up with CCELL. And we saw right away that CCELL had a game-changing hardware device based on the ceramic core. And that's essentially the industry standard. Literally almost every vape is using that. And this was all pioneered by CCELL in 2016. We got involved in 2017, right in the beginning. And we've done a lot with that. And now I'm excited to be at CCELL and part of the new revolution that we're bringing with some of the innovative devices that we're showing off right down the road here in Hall A. So definitely go check it out. But this is the next evolution of what we've been a part of now for, going on a decade here with vape. And of course, it's great being from the West Coast to see how poppin' it is out here in Massachusetts and the innovation that is really now coming from this side of the country because we grew up in the West Coast markets. This is really interesting, and thank you guys for showing up today and showing off everybody that's here with their beautiful booths.
Yeah, I mean, you guys definitely have years on me. I've been in the legal game for about 6 years. I started with Cultivate way back in the day for what it feels like for me, but quickly worked my way up from the register position, helped kind of launch recreational delivery in the state to at-home delivery, which was pretty cool. Asterisk, I did not include the 2-driver rule. That was not me. But after that, I started kind of specializing in regulation, licensing, all of that goodness. And then I went to Wana Brands. Outside was my first B2B sales. So that's why I was laughing about Denver. Nancy's an amazing woman. And then after that, I started helping Green Meadows with their sales department. Now I'm with Smokiez. So not as long and as extensive. I did come from Legacy Market, but nothing as impressive as you guys. So I'm happy to be here, and let's go.
Thank you. I'm the baby of the group. I've been in legal cannabis for I think 5 years now. It's hard to time this whole thing. I started at a company called Fernway, you guys are probably familiar with. I spent 2 years with Fernway. I was their first hire in the sales department. Then I came over to what was Nova Farms, and we're now Stashie, the wholesale side of the business. And my background is selling software, so it's the subject matter of selling cannabis is quite a bit more interesting, I'll say, than the software I was selling. So good to be here. Good to be in the presence of some true industry veterans. As far as some of the content for this afternoon, I kind of wanted to start it with a little more of a broad question. The panel's on the future of cannabis, so would love to hear from each of y'all. What do you think the future of cannabis looks like in the next 5 to 10 years? And feel free to take it whatever direction you wish, whether it's product or market fit or whatever it might be. Would love to hear what you guys think about the future of cannabis in 5 to 10 years. Why don't we start at the end with Rebecca?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to see consolidation, right? We're still seeing that happen in Colorado. Even, some major players are starting to pull out. I just heard that Dixie is liquidating and pulling out of Colorado. That's a big one, right? That really hit home for me because, like I said, I helped build those brands. So. But there's an end to certain eras. So I think we're going to continue to see that, but also want to make sure that we do leave room and space for some of these legacy brands, because without them, the rest of us wouldn't be here. Same thing with medical. That's the big thing for me. So as far as the future, I think it's about not only just being the first to market, which is why I think we saw a lot of success in some of those early companies, but being right to market, right? Like making sure that we're really looking at data now. We didn't have that 10, 12 years ago. We kind of had to do the finger in the wind, or there'd be just a bunch of us sitting around a table making decisions. We didn't really know what we were talking about from a data perspective because nobody was collecting it. So I think that's a big thing. I know everybody talks about legalization, but honestly, at this stage, it's like, when is that actually going to come? So I think we just have to find, unique ways to stay relevant. That's the big thing, I think, for cannabis. At least that's what I've learned, is you have to maintain relevancy. The minute you're not relevant in this industry, you're dead. You're dead in the water, gone.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about what I see as it's a controversial topic, the hemp industry. I think that's really, the hemp industry, I think, is leading the way for the regulated cannabis industry. And the reason I say that is because, number one, there is this beverage boom, okay? So for so many years, I can't tell you how many brands have come in and say, hey, we're going to cater to the soccer mom, and it's like, how much adoption have we seen of soccer moms vaping or smoking joints or it's been slow, right? The beverage, I think, is the first time where you're seeing a mass entrance into the category, especially with the younger generation. So the stats are they're not drinking alcohol, right? And they're obviously now consuming cannabis. And this is something that can bring people into the category because it's very intimidating if we're sitting around smoking a joint to be like, oh, you've never smoked? Hey, try it, good luck. But if we're all sitting around having dinner and there's a hemp beverage on the menu and 3 of us order a hemp beverage and oh, I've never tried that. People will try it, right? And so I think this is revolutionizing, expanding our market opportunity as an industry, which is great. And then also from the regulatory standpoint, I think the prevalence of hemp and the way that market has rolled out, in a largely unregulated fashion, is bringing attention to regulation. And so Texas is a great example where they're actually moving to ban hemp, but at the same time, now there's this big push to expand medical regulated cannabis. So what I think is going to happen is hemp is kind of broken down the door in terms of legalization of cannabis, and it's forcing people to realize that this is something that people want, and it's something that's not going away. It's here to stay, but we need to regulate in the right way. So I think that's going to ultimately bring us back to some positive regulatory reform for legal cannabis as a whole. I'd like to see everything sort of rolled together. That would be my vision. So hopefully they can do that. I think there's many other priorities for this administration. We're 4 months in, so I wouldn't expect it year one, but I think they will get it done at some point during this next 3.5 years. That's my prediction. And I will say, selfishly, right, from a CCELL perspective, we see major trends with vape increasing as a method of consumption. And I think it goes along with beverage, but it also goes along with this trend of more discreet. You can bring your vape pen on a plane, not legally, not legal advice, but you can bring it into an office and you can consume it. If you have kids in your house, you can puff your vape, they're not going to know. And so I just see this being, we saw COVID, there was a boost, right? And I see this trend continuing. And then the innovation around the vape is going to be, I think, what also brings more people into the category. So future is very bright, in my opinion. Industry is going through, our woes of, look, it's a brand new industry. There's going to be consolidation. There's going to be bankruptcies. All this stuff is happening, but there's more consumption than there was last year or 2 years ago, and there's way more to come. And so to me, that's very exciting, and I look forward to that future.
Well, at the end of the day, really, what's the difference between hemp and cannabis, other than the way that it's currently being regulated, right? So I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to go off of that, definitely right now Massachusetts is hitting a major lull. I highly recommend kind of looking into the back end of it. The CCC is kind of failing us right now in many ways, more than one. And it's making it extremely hard for independent operators to really be able to be successful or even make $1 after years and years of operation, which I think we all have seen that, right, historically. I don't think federal legalization is going to be happening anytime soon. I do 100% agree with that. However, I think we should gear up and kind of figure out how to continue, like you said, to innovate, stay relevant, but maintain the integrity of what cannabis is, right? And then my fear, obviously, with that is what's that going to look like when it does come. But if we don't get ahead of that rolling ball now to just be prepared, we're going to continue to see everyone shut down left and right as we are, but even worse. So for me, I think it's about, how do we maintain what we started this for, and maintain the legacy kind of momentum of it. And that's where, for me, the future, I think it is bright, but I think continuing the stigma that hemp and cannabis are different. And, I think that kind of also puts a barrier in place for regulatory to actually be more broad and accepting of what we actually are and not kind of put like a smoke and mirror on what it is. And obviously we're seeing that with edibles.com, edible arrangement going wild. Juana's on there. I was like, whoa, that, never thought we'd see that day. So I don't really know where it will necessarily be, but definitely the innovation part of it is where I want to see where that's going to go. Edibles specifically, I love it because I think it is breaking down those walls, in the accessibility. And that's where I'm seeing those soccer moms come into play, right? And I love going into stores and seeing them come in. So it's how do we continue to make it normalized and just destigmatize it and really say what it is, hemp and cannabis, same. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I think another big thing is research, right? That's really where Bud and Mary's has decided to invest a lot of their money, is in research. So they started MedFarm in 2017. We're the only cannabis operator in the United States that actually holds a Schedule I DEA license to do clinical trials. So we have a full-time staff of PhD researchers in our Denver facility, and we've already done clinical trials on things like dementia and Alzheimer's. So trying to figure out how can we create supplements that will help with brain health, for example, or doing label studies, looking at what are the products that are on the shelf right now, let's pull them off, let's take them to a third-party independent lab, let's see, are we really hitting the mark, right? Are those products within the variants that they have to be within that tolerance? So looking at a lot of different things from that research perspective, so we can start to figure out how can we make products that can integrate into everyday lives, right? And also help people that do have chronic conditions.
You mentioned something, Rebecca, about consolidation in your first response, and I think pretty much everybody in the fairgrounds would agree that that's to be expected. For any of you guys, where doom and gloom can be a big thing, right? Oh, consolidation, people closing, but that represents opportunity. So I'm curious what you guys think. If you expect consolidation coming soon, what sort of opportunity do you envision being available, and that brands, that whether they're here or otherwise, could kind of take and step into?
Yeah, I think right now it's about just kind of surviving through this wave, right, that we're in. So only the strong are going to survive. That's kind of what we've seen, again, especially in these legacy markets. A lot of these newer markets, they present a lot of amazing opportunities. It's fun. It's fun to go into emerging markets. We have another product that's called the Mix, that's a patented water-soluble product that we could actually use as a B2B input, right? So when you go into an emerging market, let's take, Maryland, for example. There's a lot of social equity license holders there. If we can provide them with that B2B input so they can bring an MVP to market very rapidly, that's something that's going to help the entire industry.
Yeah, I think, look, I was around in the capital boom, 2017, 2018, 2019, so much money pouring into the industry. Obviously, that's completely dried up, right? So people have to really execute. They have to get back to the basics. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? But I think that's an opportunity for people to really figure out how to better position themselves and work together. For example, one of the advantages that we have at CCELL is we have a very strong balance sheet. And so what we're trying to do is lead the way in innovation, because that's a big investment. And I was at a company, when I was running my business, we always wanted to innovate, but we never quite had the money, So when you have that budget, I think, the value that we could bring to the industry is doing the research, spending the dollars, coming up with really new innovative stuff that moves the market, that drives more consumer demand, that helps these businesses ultimately succeed. So we're taking that upon ourselves. Another thing that we could do is we can be flexible with our partners for payment terms, for example, right? Help with some of those cash flow dynamics, because we have the budget to do so. So we look at it from our perspective, yeah, there's challenges in the industry, but how can we help those customers and therefore also make our business better and find those win-win scenarios? So I would challenge everyone to kind of do that, understand the landscape. I mean, it doesn't make sense to complain about it, right? It is what it is. How can I better position myself and be successful and also help others along the way?
Yeah, no, I do have to agree with that. I think that the opportunity is going to arise, and it does show, for me, as sad as it is when we see all these companies starting to shut down and consolidate, I think at the same time that gives everyone the perspective of how to continue to grow internally when you're running these large companies, and especially being like multi-state operators. I think we see it, a little bit more of like, how do you continue to expand, and is that like a modeling license? Are we going to start seeing businesses pop up that specifically just do manufacturing partnerships now? Because that's a huge opportunity too. White label brands are something that we focused on a lot when I was at one of my last companies, and you giving that opportunity to the independents that maybe are not rather part of that consolidation, but how can we build them up? So I like where you guys kind of go with that, because at this point, I say every day, sales aside, how can I help you just grow your business in general? And that's really where we're at, right? We're continue to just make it through this really crappy time, but we all kind of have to stick together. So consolidation, I think, is going to be fine, but how do we start building these communities really that more work together rather than kind of going at each other's necks? That's what we need to see right now, but we'll see.
For you, Brianna, Massachusetts obviously is a unique culture, I think, with cannabis, and being from Massachusetts, you've seen how we operate here, how other states operate. I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of like the juxtaposition between East Coast cannabis, West Coast cannabis, how we feel the culture is evolving here versus maybe some other markets that you guys are familiar with or we operate in.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely, it's funny because I say that we're now a mature market, which is like really funny to think about because it's really been not that long. And as, some of us stay in, and once we make it past like 3 years in Mass, you call yourself a veteran, which I think is hilarious.
Dog years.
Literally, I'm like, my grays are popping out at 29 for sure.
I got the bags under my eyes to prove it.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're out.
Am I off?
Yeah, I think you're off. However, no, so I think, from what I've seen, kind of that homage to Massachusetts and kind of the community coming together with the people that have been in it, I think it's not really much of a culture still right now. I think we're still developing that. Like, I don't think anyone really knows the waters at all. And I think trying to break through, like, we have the Summit Lounge in Worcester, which is the first, like, consumption-friendly model that we have. And they got grandfathered in from the medical, side. But now we're seeing companies start interacting with the actual consumer. And we'll do industry nights, right? And everyone's in there consuming, actually enjoying the product. But we're still not breaking through, I don't think, to the whole entire general demographic in Massachusetts. But obviously, anything that happens on the West Coast happens on the East Coast. I've been saying it forever. I remember when, like, live rosin started becoming mainstream, everything was just straight like sugar wax, and like it was very ironic. So I think as we're starting to see that consumption models coming onto play, we're starting to still develop it, but it's weird going to like Jersey and seeing kind of how people interact with cannabis there, and the general workers and industries in New York City, for instance, the events that they're doing. We don't do stuff like that to that degree. So I think other markets are evolving more than ours are, faster, and I think it might also be the regulation, the regulations. Unfortunately, we're just not as developed. We still have like our baby diapers on, even though we're a mature market. It's weird.
Yeah, I would add, look, I think one of the great things about the diversification of product, going into vape, for example, going into edibles, that allowed brands to really go scale across states, right? And that brought a lot of the West Coast brands, to the East Coast. But I think another trend that is not talked about, and something that we're actually pioneering at CCELL, and if you come to our booth, you'll see some of these new devices we have. We're piggybacking off of the trends in the nicotine vape. So nicotine vape is huge, as you guys know, right? But it's also something where there hasn't been necessarily a lot of crossover. People get into nicotine vape, they're maybe not cannabis users. So as we start to model and we take the trends, and that's a very fast moving trend setting industry, right? And so we have a unique position. CCELL is part of the parent company S'more. We are one of the largest nicotine e-cig makers in the world as well. So we thought, why not take that expertise, that knowledge, take some of these new trends that are really catching on and bringing people into the category, and then apply that to the cannabis industry. And so I think you're going to see a lot of more adoption there when you have some of these devices that are out on the scene that people are looking at, and it resonates with them because they're familiar with it from the nicotine side. And so I think that's another big opportunity for innovation, and we can kind of get outside of our typical cannabis cohort and look at a more mainstream demographic. Flavoring is a key component too, right? And we're seeing that with some of the terpene companies and how they're building their flavor profiles. And I'm a cannabis guy, so I love the cannabis strains, right? Don't get me wrong, but there's a big consumer cohort that wants the flavors, right? That wants the more traditional kind of nicotine style flavors. And brands that are tapping into that, I think, have a huge opportunity to build share in states like Massachusetts that don't necessarily have the same cannabis culture as states like California and Colorado.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I mean, honestly, I think we're watching a generational shift in real time here. I call them the Juul generation, like my kids, right, who are now 23, 24. They grew up in high school smoking on these nicotine-flavored Juul devices. They are now of age and have made just a very natural transition from the Juul device over to the flavored vapes. So for us, like our batch flavors, I'll hand those out to my son and his friends. They prefer the flavors, the peachy keen, the schwarzberry, these types of flavors over your more traditional strains, which is interesting to me because I'm much more of a purist, right? I don't really go after the flavor. I'm looking for like the weed flavor. I need that flavor for it to be legit for me. So I think that's the big thing. I had pulled out actually a statistic out that it says Gen Z now spends nearly 38% of their cannabis dollars on vapes. So that means they are spending more on vapes than they are flower. That's huge. And remember, these kids are continuing to get a little bit older. Also, that came out of Headset for 2024, where we saw a 20% year-over-year increase in vapes, specifically among Gen Z. Those numbers are crazy when you think about it. So if companies aren't watching this data, that goes back to the data again and making decisions based on the data, then they're missing out on some major, major opportunities.
Thank you for those data points.
Yeah.
That confirms my thesis. So
I did my homework.
We love a confirmed thesis. Oh, man. You all mentioned something or pulled on something that I want to kind of dive into a little bit. One thing I've noticed being in sales for the last couple of years in cannabis is a tendency for people, myself included, to project our tastes onto the average consumer, right? Oh, I don't like this, so most people aren't going to like that. Or that's just a distillate product, so it's whatever. How do you guys reckon with that? How do you deal with that, whether you're developing brands or you're selling to multiple markets? Like, how do you kind of get over the hump of like, just because I don't like it doesn't mean that the market might not receive it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point. It goes to what we're just saying, right? There's this whole new generation. You and I were talking, we're the same age, about to, reach that 40 cliff, right? And it's like, yeah, I still feel young, right? But in reality, there's this huge cohort of consumers that are coming that we're out of touch with, right? And so I think going to the data.
That's why you have kids.
My oldest is only 6, so not quite ready for vaping, but we'll get him in the testing group when the time is right.
I can get them on infused edibles.
So, but I think we just need to be knowledgeable that, look, there's a huge consumer base that we're a little bit out of touch with. And so let's look at the data, let's look at the trends and what they're using. And I like to look at these other industries that they're a part of, right? Like the nicotine vaping industry. And, that's a good thing to borrow from, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll go off that too. I mean, so for me with distillate, because everyone's like, oh, it's a distillate. And I get it. And I always say it. Everyone does. Distillate's a distillate is distillate, right? So, however you market that is up to your own each company. We've seen people like Wanna, Smokiez ourselves, re-add the terpenes back. But the way that I kind of just position it when everyone says that, I'm like, yeah, but it's THC. It does its job, right? That's what you want. And then if you have other minor cannabinoids in it, great. But, live rosin, I call it more of a full body high. It's a more of a dynamic effect base and it's more of an experience. You don't don't really get that, for some things, but that may not be what you want. And that's the thing. I don't make product lines like based off of what I consume, because sometimes that's the 1%, right? It's not for everyone. So for me, it's really just, what is your purpose? What do you want to feel? And it's just going off of that. So I don't think it's really countering it, just maybe like making it very apparent that there's just a different purpose for everything, and that's it. For me, live rosin all day. We know that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always been really surveying the market. So I created what's called the Secret Society of Bud Tenders in 2015 in Colorado. That was a way to get bud tenders really to endear them to the brand, right? And there was also a great line of communication that we opened up with those individuals to be able to ask them questions, right? Because they're going to be brutally honest. They really will tell you the truth. So having that also just loop, that's how we close the loop on some of our educational module platforms like Learn Brands, which I think is out here in Massachusetts. There's lots of different ones, but providing them with a sample so they can try it, and then serving them a survey so they can actually give us their opinion, that goes a long way. And we go back and look at those data points, but we've also done, more mainstream type of surveying too, where we're doing, maybe depending on the markets that we're in, let's say it's like Colorado, Michigan, and Missouri, for example. And so we'll take a subset of that population and then really start to drill down if we're trying to maybe launch a new product. Let's say we want to dip our toe in the edible space, which we're not technically in right now. But what would we want to go to market with? Is it really a gummy, or is it a chocolate? Is it a hard candy? So it starts to really at least inform you, so you're not just making these decisions based on bias, which back in the day, that's really all we had.
Well, I also think like listening to your staff, bud tenders, so like sampling, I put such a high emphasis on it, but also getting that feedback, right? And I always tell them, like, if I go into a store, I'm like, dude, your feedback, you guys know better than I do. You hear more than I do, right? And that's like, for instance, like vapes, not my big forte, but the, distillate half grams that you can travel with, people come in and they would buy them left and right. So I guess, again, listening to what they say as feedback, because I don't know. I don't know what I don't know,
Well, and I think we're also we're moving into a more ubiquitous information age, right? With AI, I think our company, we have the budget to do consumer focus groups, and we're very we pay attention to those. We try to pick up the trends and across different cohorts. But look, not everyone has the budget for that. The beauty is AI is going to make this information a lot cheaper and a lot more ubiquitous. So I think we're going to have so much information. The only job that we need to do is know how to access it and to put it into practice, right? That's going to be our job.
Excellent. I'm going to go off book a little bit because you guys have both said a couple things that I think make sense to touch into. One thing I hear a lot about consumer and bud tender education is the trope that we'll get there. And I don't know that I believe that necessarily. So I'm curious how you guys have kind of come up against educating whether consumers who just aren't interested in being educated, or maybe bud tenders who, I think take the easy route of like following the sativa indica hybrid, kind of like model of learning about cannabis. Curious how you guys have like gone up against that.
I mean, again, going back to Secret Society bud tenders, I really have tried to replicate that at pretty much every brand that I've gone to. So right now at Bud & Mary's, we just launched one called Best Buds. Really took inspiration from, because it is a family-owned and operated company. Bud & Mary are actual people. They're the grandparents of our group president. His name is Lucas Nelson. He reports up to his uncle, which is Chris Nelson, who's the CEO of another enterprise called Chemin Industries. They're from Iowa. That's why we're in that state. It's still purely medical. And I just think it's about like creating community, right? That's the whole purpose of this. And I think if you create that community and also specific, you allow bud tenders to have access to specific things that they wouldn't otherwise, that goes a long way. These people are sort of at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to the pay scale. So if you can create some experiences that really resonate with them, that's going to go a really long way. They're going to go back and they're going to tell their other bud tenders like, hey, Bud & Mary's did this really cool thing, or have you heard about this network that they have? And these are all the things that you can get if you're engaged in that. So that's the way I've chosen to attack it.
Yeah, for me, coming from like the retail side of things, nothing kills your soul more than when a budtender just says something random because they don't know the answer to the question that a customer is asking. So for me, I have to shout out Green Flower Institute, if anyone's familiar with Max Simon. He's a great dude. But his platform, you know, I remember the first time I ever took my retail manufacturing and then cultivation certifications through them. And I remember learning so much more than I actually had expected, like years into the industry. So for me, I really liked that model, but at the same time, you have to give them accessibility to the product as they're learning and to be able to try it, to be able to speak to it. But yeah, you have to motivate them to want to learn. How do you do it, right? I like what you do, and I think it's amazing because no one puts an emphasis on putting them first. And I always say it, like they're the backbones of every company. So if you don't give them the education, the accessibility, they're useless to you as a company. And essentially, we're just, you know, bleeding money for nothing, and then that's why people lose their interest in their job. Like you're not a cash register attendee. Like you are literally giving people a product, and you should understand what goes into making it and what it is and what it's going to do. And we are doing a very big disservice if we don't give them that resources to be able to be educated and make discerning, you know, sales. It's ridiculous that we don't, you know.
Yeah, I always say, you know, bud tenders, they'll make or break you at the point of sale. That's just it. And a lot of times I found that there's generally sort of one leader, right, of the pack in that retail setting, and whatever that person gravitates towards, generally the rest of them are.
The
so that's where you got to stand out.
I think one thing I've noticed doing a ton of bud tender educations and trainings and the speeds and feeds, you know, what the product is, how it's different, the branding, that all hits home, and that's great and well to have, but walking into a dispensary with a smile on your face and genuine interest in like what they care about and what they like, and you know, often I'll walk into a dispensary and they'll say, "Oh, do you want to talk to the manager?" And I'm like, I mean, if they're here, but like, I would like to talk to you as well. Like, what's your name? What do you like? What's moving really well? You know, and just strike up a conversation, and then, you know, if you show something you're a real human being, it goes a long way.
My notes apps are insane because like I have like one for each store I go to, and like I know, you know, what bud tender has chickens, and I'll bring in chicken, you know, snacks for them or something like that, and it really does go a long way. And at the end of the day, we all are here to make money. We want our product to move. We want, you know, both parties to make money. So yeah, I mean, going that extra mile, and it's like, no, I don't really need to talk to the manager. I'm good, guys. Here's like a little cake, like, you know, see whatever. But yeah.
We back up a lot of that too with just field marketing activities, you know, so having I call them brand specialists, not brand ambassadors. So those are full-time people that go in, but they're not just responsible for doing pop-ups. They're also working on merchandising. They're educating bud tenders. They're building rapport with those people. This industry is about relationships at the end of the day. Probably almost any industry is. Maybe not in tech so much, I don't know. But definitely cannabis, right? It's like, it's not really what you know, it's who you know and those relationships and what you're willing to do for the person on the other line. You know, did their carburetor just burn out? Can I replace that for you? You know, really showing up for people in a really meaningful and intentional way, I think is really how you get these people on the hook, you know, for life. You build these relationships, hopefully friendships, right, that last a really long time. So I think also gathering that intel, you know, I depend on my field team to bring all that intel back to me so that I can say, oh, okay, we need to up our game on this merchandising display, or this particular bud tender really loves us. What can we do extra for them? Can I get them some extra product? Can I get them some extra swag? Whatever it is, like trying to move that needle incrementally, it's like step by step by step, day after day. I've been doing this for so long that's really, I think, how you win the end game.
We've got about 4 minutes left.
All right.
So this is my last question. I know none of us here on the stage are regulators or policymakers of any kind, and I think we like it that way, but would love to hear from you guys. You know, maybe if you were a regulator or a policymaker, what are some things that, whether it's in your market at home or generally speaking, you'd like to see as part of the changes in the...
I got a big one. So again, we're in Iowa. They do not allow flower sales there at all. The only thing you can buy there are concentrates, which is totally ass backwards to me, I personally think, right? Like, why, what? So you can buy a dabbable product, even though you're not supposed to smoke it. That's only to be vaped. You can buy a vape. You can buy the mix, like I mentioned, which is a water-soluble powder, so you can go home and make your own edibles, which, how do I know how to dose those properly, right? But you can't buy flower. So the biggest thing for me right now is us trying to change that political landscape in Iowa to change that. I think it's a stigma behind a perception. I think that's really, it boils down to optics for people in Iowa. They don't want to see people smoking weed on the corner. That's why they're okay with these more discreet formats, but they're not okay with flower.
Bass backwards, I think they call that.
For me, definitely Massachusetts. Number one, it's upping the daily limits for a recreational consumer for purchasing. It's an ounce limitation. You know, a 20 pack of 100 milligram edibles is 5.6, you know, so grams of your 28 gram allotment. So for me, you know, number one, does it not only limit how much money we make, and we're already not making any money, but I think that that's just absolutely ridiculous. And then also on top of it, the medical program is kind of a little bit of a nightmare. But most importantly, checks and balances in Massachusetts. You know, where I can't even go enough into detail with the CCC and how, you know, lack of accountability there is. But really, you know, putting people in the place of powers that give a shit and have skin in the game. But all we have is a bunch of people in it that are not, they don't care about the product. They don't care about the people that are behind these independents. And unfortunately, now we're seeing everyone closing doors, and it's just the lack of caring. And, you know, so I think a lot of reform when it comes down to Massachusetts specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a macro perspective, I mean, obviously that we just haven't done it right everywhere. I mean, let's just be honest. If you look at this, you would say, okay, there's a group of legal operators trying to do things right. Let's make it easier for them, and let's make it harder for the other group, so that the folks that are doing it right, that are paying taxes, et cetera, can actually thrive, and then let the free market wipe out the illicit activity. And obviously alcohol has done that over 130 years. There's no illicit market, but you have to let these companies get to scale. You have to let their production get to economies of scale where they have a low enough cost that even if somebody wants to compete in the illicit market, they can't compete on price. And we never did that from the onset. It was about maximizing tax revenue for the state, and there was just no thinking of how do we make these businesses long-term sustainable and make this marketplace long-term sustainable. So unfortunately, nobody's got it right, and I don't really have hope at this point on a state-by-state basis. My hope is on the national basis. I do think hemp is driving that, because hemp is one of those things that, look, it's a free market, and look at the cost. And that's why it's competing, because they can deliver such a lower cost. So hopefully people think about that when they go to actually regulate this thing nationally. And let it be more of a free market. Let the free market dynamics work. And there's plenty of tax revenue to make on the back end if you allow for a successful industry. And I'm in California, right, where it's really bad. And I just read something where now the DCC is going to make more onerous penalties on these illicit operations. And it's like, we legalized in 2018, and we're here in 2025 still talking about storefronts that are operating without a license. Storefronts. It's crazy. This should have been fixed a long time ago. Free market dynamics, I think, are the answer. Obviously, we need some regulatory oversight, but it should be a lot smarter, and it hasn't been there. I hope there's going to be a cleanup coming. If we could get to interstate commerce too, I think that will help a lot of people in the industry really get those efficiencies.
Awesome. I believe that's all the time we have. So thank you guys for watching building the future of cannabis.
Love the energy.